Look at that. Just 10 days left until Election Tuesday. Both campaigns are now in an all-out sprint to the finish line. As I mentioned, President Trump made a brief stop in Florida earlier today, casting his ballot in West Palm Beach. According to the latest CBS News battleground tracker, former Vice President Joe Biden has a 3-point lead over the president there in Florida. The president held back-to-back rallies this week in the Sunshine State in an effort to gain additional support ahead of the election. Former President Barack Obama will also be speaking on behalf of Vice President Joe Biden in Miami later today. Florida has been a historically difficult state to win for both parties due to its highly diverse voting blocs. As Election Day approaches, both campaigns are hoping to appeal to two of the state's key demographics, seniors and Latinos. CBS News campaign reporter LaCrai Mitchell joins me now, and I'd also like to welcome in CBS News campaign reporter Nicole Sganga. Nicole, I'm going to start with you. President Trump, as I mentioned, holding these back-to-back rallies in Florida. Why is the Sunshine State so important to his reelection, and can he secure a second term in office without it?
Hey, Lana, good to be with you. And this is the million-dollar question. And I'm going to sort of do a cop-out answer here, which is that the president's path to 270 electoral votes on Election Day is made a whole lot easier if he can take all 29 from the state of Florida. Now, the campaign has made investments in this state. The president has been to the Sunshine State in 2020 alone over 14 times for campaign trips, official White House stops, and also to vacation in Mar-a-Lago. In addition, the Trump campaign has poured more into this state than any other, over $70 million in television and online advertising. Nearly $6 million of that is in Spanish language TV. The Trump campaign really looking to win here, the president having spent multiple days campaigning in Florida last week, also Vice President Mike Pence.
All right, LaCrai, President Trump visited one of the nation's largest retirement communities on Friday. The Villages has played a vital role for candidates in past elections. We may be familiar with the Villages from that campaign video that President Trump retweeted. But in the past 2 weeks, the president's campaign has taken trips to the community twice. He's been there 4 times in the past month trying to shore up support from seniors ahead of the election. Why is this particular place so important to President Trump, and how are voters in the area really responding to the president's frequent visits during the pandemic?
Well, Lana, in a state where 20% of the population is 65 and older, you can quickly see why this voting bloc is so important. And in our latest CBS News Battleground Tracker poll, while the president leads among Florida likely voters ages 65 and up by 9 points, Biden is cutting into his 2016 margins when he carried that group by 17 points. And so it's going to continue to be a crucial block here in this state. And what I've been hearing from voters is this: his supporters feel like they're happy that he's here. They're happy that he's coming to visit, and they feel like, I've heard the line over and over again, faith over fear. They feel like they can't just be inside all of the time. And so yesterday we saw a lot of people come out to that rally in the Villages, and some had on masks, some did not. And the ones that didn't have on masks, they said that they felt comfortable to be around other people who didn't either. And what I've heard from Biden and Harris supporters, as I'm sure you won't be surprised, they say they're not surprised that the president is holding these huge rallies in a state that has, for the most part, lifted a lot of its COVID-19 restrictions that were put in place earlier in the summer. And so I will just end off by saying this: this is going to continue to be a block, and so it's not a surprise to me that the president's campaign has been there twice in 2 weeks. And as he said in a rally in Ocala last week, which is about 30 miles north of the Villages, they love the Villages. His campaign loves the Villages, and it's because he said the Villages fights for Trump.
Well, he certainly has shown them a lot of love back. All right. Nicole, the latest CBS News Battleground Tracker poll, as we just mentioned, shows Vice President Biden is polling at 46% with seniors in the state of Florida. The president polling at 53%. LaCrai talked a bit about the president's decrease in margins among seniors. How significant is Biden's growing success with the senior community, and is it a trajectory that you expect will continue?
Absolutely. It is really significant, and let me tell you why. Now, historically, in previous elections in Florida, a lot of the concentration has been on persuading swing voters in the I-4 corridor. But this time around, we're starting to see that Americans are decided. It is very partisan times. In Florida, seniors that I'm speaking to are concerned about the coronavirus pandemic, and that is in part why we've seen those margins among senior voters shift, and more voters going over to the Biden campaign, supporting the Biden campaign. I even went to a Trump rally, the one that LaCrai had mentioned in Ocala, Florida last week, where I spoke to a group of senior citizens who, despite the fact that they supported the president, were upset that he was not wearing a mask, and in fact wouldn't even go into the rally and instead watched that rally from across the street. So seniors here, worried about the coronavirus pandemic. They've been impacted by this disproportionately, and we are going to see that play out in the race, particularly in Florida, which, as LaCrai mentioned, has such a large block of senior voters.
Yeah. So, LaCrai, let's go over to you to talk about another demographic group that both campaigns are targeting: Spanish speakers. I know that particularly in Florida, the Spanish-speaking community is a diverse one, and they vote in different ways. They're not a monolithic voting bloc. So what are you seeing from the campaigns as they're trying to target Spanish-speaking voters?
I'm so glad that you made that point, Lana, because it is critical to remember that Latino voters in Florida are not monolithic, as is the case with most groups of voters. And in Florida, Latino voters comprise 17% of registered voters in the state, and that number is already higher than what it was in 2016, when there were more than 2 million registered Latino voters in the state. Now that number is more than 2.5 million. And so it's no surprise then that we've seen both campaigns make very pointed appeals to Latino voters by making trips to South and Central Florida, where you see larger groups and populations of Latino communities. They both have Spanish language ads going throughout the state. And President Trump, some of the specific examples, he's had roundtables with Venezuelan community leaders, and his campaign has really tried to brand Democrats as socialists, which political scientists tell me could have a varied impact depending on which group of Latino voters you're talking to. For former Vice President Biden, if you combine his trips and Senator Harris's trips to the state, what we've seen is 5 visits, and 3 of those have been to South Florida. And Biden's first in-person visit to the state was to Central Florida to kick off Hispanic Heritage Month. And when he was in Central Florida during that trip, they unveiled their Biden-Harris and the Biden-Harris policy for Puerto Rico. And so we've seen very clear examples of how they have tried to really appeal to that group. I'll leave you with one more interesting stat from 2016. We've now seen that it was reported that 62% of Latino voters in Florida voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And while 54% of Cuban voters voted for then candidate Trump, only 26% of non-Cuban Latino voters voted for him. And so going into this election, his team already knew that that was a group that they were going to appeal to. And like I said earlier, it's a game of margins in Florida, where elections are won and lost by sometimes less than a point. And so his goal is to maybe not win over completely Latino voters, but his team thinks that if they can at least cut into Biden's margins, then that's considered a success.
All right, Nicole Sganga, LaCrai Mitchell, great to have both of you with us today.